Greetings everybody, Ben here from TheVirtualEconomist, and welcome to part 5 in my unusual trading guide. It has sure been a while since my last episode, but as you can tell, I'm by no means giving up on the series. In the last episode, I talked about how to buy unusual quick sells, showing you guys how to buy these discounted unusuals with your pure keys. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how to list your unusual for sale and how to know what offers to take on your hat or make on other people's hats. As always, if you haven't seen the first 4 episodes, I would definitely recommend watching them before you watch this one. This episode builds off them heavily, so what I say in this video of course would make a little bit more sense if you have watched the other episodes. Anyway, without further ado, let's get right on into the video. Okay, so going into this episode, I'm going to assume that you have or will get an unusual hat. And you're probably wondering, well, how do I find people that might actually want to buy this hat? After all, there is no way to make profit if you can't sell your hat. And the first thing I would recommend doing is listing the unusual for sale on both of the main classified websites, backpack.tf and TF2 Outpost. Listing your unusual on each of these sites will help people know that you are in fact willing to sell your unusual, which is obviously the goal here. Backpack.tf is definitely the easiest to use. All you gotta do is just go over to your backpack, hover over the unusual, and hit the list button. Put in how many keys you would like to list it for, and put in any notes that you think would make people want to actually buy the unusual. I usually say something like, looking for X keys pure or unusual overpay. Now, I will explain why this is best in a little bit, but for now, just hit list. To list an item on TF2 Outpost, click the green plus in the top right hand corner of the website. Find the hat that you would like to list in your backpack and click on it to add it to the left hand side of the trade. Then go ahead and click on the right hand side. This is usually where you put what you would like to sell the unusual for. However, on TF2 Outpost, there is really just no way to put 20 keys on the right hand side because you can only put a maximum of 8 items. So, unlike backpack.tf, there is no direct way to list an item for whatever amount you want, meaning that most traders have to use TF2 Outpost a little bit differently. Here's what I usually do. Of course here, you're probably going to be looking for unusual offers, so what I do is search for fake and find the TF2 offers card. I usually change its quality to unusual since you're going to be looking for unusual offers, and put a few into the trade on the right hand side. To finish it off, I also add some keys because you should always be willing to sell your unusual for pure keys. Then you can go ahead and put however many keys you would actually be willing to sell the unusual for in the description of the trade. This is usually called setting your buyout and is often abbreviated as B/O. Keep in mind, this is exactly the same as listing an unusual on backpack.tf for a certain amount of keys. On backpack.tf, nobody really uses the verbiage B/O, but it is basically the same thing. Some people on Outposts also use the abbreviation C/O, which stands for current offer. I typically don't like using current offers in my trades because it always looks bad when you haven't gotten any offers in like a week. So, as an example, I might say something like, selling this hat for a buyout of 20 keys pure or unusual overpay. Like I said, I will explain why I say this in a little bit. Also, keep in mind that on TF2 Outposts, using colors or bold or organized text will only make your trade look more professional and help it grab people's attention. Alright, so now that you have your hat listed on both backpack.tf and TF2 Outposts, you should now be in a position to collect offers on your unusual. To get the most amount of people to respond to your classified listings, you're going to want to manually bump them to make them relist and appear at the top. I know this sounds like kind of a pain, but I would definitely recommend bumping at least once a day to show that you are in fact active. If you have the money, buying backpack.tf and Outpost Premium helps a lot, but it isn't necessary. Just hopping onto unusual trade servers every once in a while will help you get a lot of offers as well. So a question I get asked a ton is, well, how do I know what offers to take on my hat, or what hat should I offer on? There are many ways to make profit with offers, but at the same time, accepting a bad offer might lose you a number of keys. So, what I hope to answer in the next part of the video is how to know whether an offer is good or bad, and what offers you should try to take. When I talked about how to list an unusual on the classifieds, I said to list it for pure keys or unusual overpay. Most simply, these are the two kinds of offers that you will want to be getting to make profit. Your ultimate goal in taking offers is to get the best unusuals you possibly can. This might seem obvious, but the better the unusual you get, the higher the chance it will be able to sell for full pure or an absurd overpay offer, and obviously, if you get one of those kind of offers, you're going to make a lot of profit. You probably got most unusuals from either A, buying them as a quick sell, or B, getting them in another unusual offer. And when possible, you always want to try to note how many pure keys you bought a hat for, and remember this number when you're accepting offers. I'm going to call it your buy price, and it is very important in determining whether you are profiting from a trade. If you bought a quick sell, then your buy price is simply how many keys you paid for it. If you bought a 20 key unusual for 14 keys as a quick sell, then your buy price is 14 keys. Accepting pure or unusual offers is really quite simple once you look at your buy price. If someone offers you 16 keys on that 20 key unusual, there is no reason not to accept that offer. Sure, you might be losing 4 keys in unusual value, but you made 2 keys pure profit since you bought it for 14 keys. On the flip side, if someone offers you a 22 key unusual, usually there is no reason not to accept that offer if the unusuals are similar in tier. You're basically getting 2 keys in unusual value for free, which when put into perspective means that you actually bought that 22 key unusual for 14 keys pure, meaning that the unusual quick sell discount was more than 30% off. Obviously, that is not too shabby. So, if you're gonna try to trade your hat for a better one, well then, how do you figure out whether your hat is actually better than another hat? After all, you wouldn't want to trade your awesome hat for a horrible one. If the unusuals are similar in price, what I'd like to do is make a mental chart of each unusual's pros and cons. It might be easier for you guys to write it down using paper and pencil. If you remember all the way back to episodes 2 and 3, I talked about what different things made unusuals good or bad. In episode 2, I talked about all the different positive and negative attributes that hats have. For review, the good attributes are being a nice looking hat, having a good class for the hat, being all class or multi-class, being a misc, being clean, having few sellers on the market, or being one of one in existence. And the bad attributes are being an ugly hat, being for a bad class, being a robo hat, being duped, having tons of sellers on the market, being unpriced, or being inflated. Then, in episode 3, I rated each unusual effect on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of sellability. I don't think that my tier order is in any way perfect, but I do think it is close enough that you can base your decisions off of it. So, if the number is 3 or greater, I would count that as a good attribute. If it is 2 or less, I would say that it is bad. So, adding these, here is the master list of good and bad attributes. If someone offers their hat on yours, you should take a look at the pros and cons of each hat and write them down. For example, let's take a look at the hats that I prompted at the start of episode 2. If you had a purple energy croc and leather slouch, and somebody offered you a masked flies Sammy cap, you would need to decide whether the offer was good or bad. While both hats are worth around 50 keys, it may seem obvious that the slouch is way better. But let's go through the attributes of each hat to figure out exactly why. For the purpose of this example, I'm going to assume that each hat is clean and the only one on the market. So, for the slouch, it is a nice looking hat, it is also clean, it has few sellers on the market, and it is a high tier effect, as I rated Purple Energy a 5. Sniper is a very mid-range class in my opinion, so its class is not a con nor a pro. You might also notice that there is no obvious negative attributes, which means that the hat is pretty darn good. For the Sammy cap, it is clean, has few sellers on the market, and some people could potentially call it themed. But it is also an ugly hat for a bad class, inflated probably because it is quote-unquote themed, and does have a horrible effect, in fact the worst effect in the game in my opinion, with flies, which I rated a number 1. Since the slouch has 4 pros and no cons, it seems that keeping it here would be the best option versus the Sammy cap with 3 pros and 4 obvious cons. Like I said earlier, all you're looking for is a pure or unusual overpay offer, and keeping the slouch would make it far, far easier for you to get one of those 2 desired offers. Looking back on my past episodes, I probably could and should have used this system here to determine the discount of a quick sell, because if you really think about it, it's very applicable here. If a hat has no downsides at all, like the croc and leather slouch, you could probably profit off maybe a 25% off discount. If the hat has a ton of flaws like the Sammy cap, then I really wouldn't think about trading for it or buying it as a quick sell unless it would be at least 35% off. Applying a list of pros and cons works very well for offering 2 hats of equal value, but inevitably a lot of trades are going to be more complicated than that. So what I've done here is compiled a list of general tips that should help you in offers that are more intricate than just a one-for-one deal, and should help you get a better feel for what good offers look like. For example, how would you evaluate trading 2 unusuals for 1? Or how about trading an unusual for an Australian? These tips should help clear up some of these more complex types of offers. So let's get right on into them. Number 1, the price of an unusual does not determine how good it is, and this is very, very important. I think that many people assume that when they trade for an expensive unusual, it must in some way be better than any unusual that is lower in value than it. Unfortunately, this is completely false. Oftentimes there are unusuals that are super desirable since they are more inexpensive. On the flip side, there are some super expensive unusuals that are completely impossible to sell just because they are so expensive. No one would ever want to pay that much for them, so they just don't sell well at all. Number 2, looking at the price of an unusual will not determine how much profit you have made. This is pretty much a natural extension of what I just talked about, that unusuals are not as good as their price tag. Oftentimes, I will see someone start off with, say, a really nice 20 key unusual that they bought for, say, 16 keys, and then they accept an unusual overpay offer on it. Then they keep accepting unusual overpay offers on this new unusual and keep going until they've maybe gotten a 35 key unusual. This might seem pretty awesome. You've upgraded a 20 key unusual into a 35 key unusual. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that the person has made 15 keys pure profit. When you keep accepting overpay offers, chances are you are slowly upgrading your original unusual into a worse and worse hat. Remember, the price doesn't mean it's better, so you probably now have a hat with more downsides than upsides. If you reach a point when no one will accept your new unusual unless you overpay a bunch, then you can see how you really did not make 15 keys profit. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep accepting unusual overpay. Remember, you can still quick sell your hat. So, it should be easy to quick sell that 35 key hat for maybe 23 or 24 keys, even if it's terrible. And since you bought the original hat for 16 keys, all of that is pure profit. What I'm getting at here is that it is hard to tell if you have actually made profit unless you can get your assets back into pure keys. This is because most hats don't sell for pure, and sometimes certain hats won't even sell for unusuals of the same value. Unfortunately, a lot of the time it just won't be possible to get everything back into pure keys, but using common sense, if you've managed to trade up a 10 key hat to say a 50 key hat, then it is pretty obvious that you've made profit. I just don't want people considering it to be 50 keys pure in value, because of course if you're going to be selling it for pure, you're never going to be able to get that amount. Number 3, look to downgrade one unusual into multiple ones when possible. For some reason, I've always thought that there's been some conspiracy among high-tier traders to make you think that upgrading unusuals is good. However, this is just not the case. Like I've said before, the cheaper your unusual is, the easier it will be to sell, just because there are far more people that can afford lower value hats. And of course, with more competition, the cheaper the unusual is, the greater the chance you'll be able to find somebody who would want to pay pure or overpay. I also think it's important to keep in mind that trading for cheaper unusuals also ensures that you don't get screwed over by a heavily inflated hat. Most low tiers have been updated recently on backpack.tf, so you really don't have to worry about a hat with a really expensive price that is just not accurate. However, this isn't to say that upgrading 2 hats for 1 is the worst thing to do. When you have more expensive unusuals, you will get greater profit margins, which is something to consider. I can see why some people will do this, but you have to be prepared to trade much slower, since the more expensive the hat is, the slower it will sell. So, most of the time, I decline upgrading offers unless my trading partner is willing to overpay. Number 4. Overpaying is actually something that is good to do. I know a lot of people that are super opposed to overpaying at all. However, oftentimes you might acquire an unusual in a trade that just seems really hard to sell. But don't fear, one of the best ways of getting rid of an unusual that is hard to sell is going to people on trade servers or outposts and offering your hat as overpay on another person's better hat. For most people, if the overpay is good enough, they'll be fine with trading for a worse hat since they can get more in unusual value. Number 5. When offering, favor the extremes. Well, what do I mean by this? Unusuals and effects often are conflicting in their tier levels. For example, a Burning Flames Robo hat conflicts in that it has a super high tier effect on a horrible hat. However, you can easily play this to your advantage. A lot of people love having a really high tier effect on a low tier hat or having a really high tier hat with a low tier effect. So, for example, having a Steaming Antlers would be a very good hat because it is very desirable. Sure, steaming is a pretty average effect, but people would just love to have it since it is by far one of the cheapest all-class myths that can possibly be obtained. On the flip side, remember my Burning Flames handle from my trading series? Yeah, I sold that hat for 40 keys pure when it was only worth 36 keys on backpack.tf just because it was one of the cheapest Burning Flames hats you could possibly obtain. Sure, the handle wasn't a great hat, but everybody would 100% overlook this just because of how inexpensive it is. Number 6. Pure is king. If an offer has some keys and some unusuals in it, it is called a mixed offer. Mixed offers are very good because they contain pure keys. If you don't believe me just how good they are, look at this scenario. You buy a hat worth 30 keys for 22 keys. Then you sell the hat for 15 keys pure and a 15 key unusual. You invested 22 keys originally, so you can subtract the 15 keys you just got back, giving you 7 keys. So, in theory, you bought this 15 key hat for 7 keys. This is an insane deal. Anything over 7 keys is pure profit. This is why mixed offers are so damn good. Plus, with those 15 keys, you could just go ahead and buy another quick sell, which is what you would want to do anyway. Lastly, mixed offers are also so insane because they are almost always downgrades. Getting a mixed downgrade is probably the best kind of deal you could possibly get, so when possible, always try to get them. Number 7. Trade for non-unusual items. Most non-unusual items are very inexpensive. However, some are not. Examples include Australiums and Max's heads. These items are awesome in that they often sell for pure keys. So, if you trade a 30 key unusual for 25 keys worth of non-unusual items, then you basically sold it for 25 pure. However, it's not quite this easy just because it might take a while to sell these items for full pure. So, in that case, you could just sell an Australium or a Max's head to the highest buy order on backpack.tf. There are a lot of people that wouldn't like to trade 25 keys pure for your 30 key unusual, but if that's disguised as an item, they will most likely be willing to do it. So, trade it for these non-unusual items for easy profit. Number 8. Avoid anything weird. While I said to trade for non-unusual items, you really do need to avoid any non-unusual items that seem impossible to sell or have a suspicious value. For example, I would almost never trade an unusual for a pro killstreak weapon with parts, super expensive skins, hats with craft numbers, or old glitched items. It's hard for me to cover all my bases here, but in short, don't trade for any non-unusual item that seems suspect in value and doesn't have a lot on the market. Oftentimes, with little on the market, it is almost impossible to know how much you could really get for it, and you could lose tons of keys trading for one of these oddities. Also, the item having buy orders on backpack.tf helps a ton because you know that someone would pay at least X for the item, further telling you that the item would be easier to sell. And honestly, if you have a gut feeling that something is fishy, just decline the trade. This is one of the easiest ways to get scammed in the long run, and you definitely want to avoid being scammed. Number 9. Negotiate. I see so many people that close the trade window on a trade server way too soon. Oftentimes, you will need to offer many times or see many different offers before a trade can be decided. So be patient, and if the other person declines an offer, try switching it up a little bit and offer in a different way. This can be crucial if you have a hat that is not selling well. Plus, every person has different biases towards certain types of unusuals or offers, so if you make more than one offer, you have a greater chance of getting a trade. Anyway guys, that is going to be it for the video. I know that this has definitely been a long one, but hopefully you guys learned a little bit about how to list a hat and what kind of offers to accept on it. Join me next time where I finally talk about what other kinds of unusuals you may encounter, such as unpriced unusuals, unusual weapons, and unusual taunts. Until then guys, thanks for watching.